In 1992, the body of a young woman was found near a cemetery. 18-year-old Katie Rackliff had been brutally stabbed to death in a frenzied and completely unprovoked attack. Her body had also been horribly mutilated. Police immediately began the search for her killer. They were looking for a strong young man who they believed would fit the profile. But 5 years later, the real truth would unfold. This is the case of Devil's Daughter. Hello you lovely lot. Well, I did say I was going to be doing some extra videos and here is one of them. Yes, crime consistency might be my catchphrase, but it doesn't mean I can't throw you in an extra video when I feel like it and when I've got some time. Also, if you're new to this channel and you're thinking, what is this woman gabbering on about? Well, I release my content religiously on a Wednesday and a Sunday. Crime and consistency is my catchphrase, but of course, I'm releasing this on a different day, just as an addition. So if you do like crime content and you enjoy deep dives, then why not subscribe to the channel and give me a comment. Let me know your thoughts about these videos. Let's get on with today's case, which is one of those that is breathtakingly terrible. Understandably, every single case that I cover is terrible because it involves victims, but sometimes it's as if the individual perpetrator defies every single expectation that we have in our society. And Sharon Carr 100% fits this. Now, if you know the case of the Devil's Daughter, hopefully watching this one will still inform you of something new. You know me, guys, I like to go that little bit further when I do my research and try to find out information that you might not know everything about. And hopefully I've done my job today. Let's get on with the case. So Sharon Carr, who is she? Well, she was born in Belize. That was in 1979, and at the time that was known as British Honduras. So it's a colony on the east coast of Central America. And when you look at it economically, it was pretty destitute. It was poverty stricken. So understandably, if you're growing up in that area without a means financially, it's going to be problematic. It's going to be difficult to eat. It's going to be difficult to survive, full stop. And that's where she begins her life. Sharon didn't actually know her biological father, but what I will tell you about her actual stepfather was that he was an incredibly violent drunk. Also, her mum was known to have quite a short temper, and her mum was also very physically abusive. Now, back in the day, and certainly in certain countries, corporal punishment towards children was something that happened a great deal, even in the UK. In the 70s, it was quite normalised for parents to hit their children, but we're not talking about that where Sharon Carr is concerned. We're talking about absolute abuse. She's got this parent who's violent consistently because of his alcohol issues. Also, the mother is somebody who's being violent towards her. And Sharon Carr said that the punishments would go as far as for her to be burnt. Now, the idea of a parent willingly harming you to such a degree that they burn you, that is a case of a very malevolent individual as a parent. It's as simple as that. And as a child, what you want to be able to do is to regulate your environment. You want to feel safe in it. It wants to act as the foundation of your security, an anchor of your life. And when you have this kind of parenting that's often chaotic because of the alcohol and also violent because of the abuse, you simply don't get to feel that sense of safety. And that's going to have an impact on a child growing up. So she's growing up in this absolutely volatile environment. Her mother also practiced voodoo. So she believed in superstitions and rituals, and she actually taught these to Sharon Carr. It is worth noting that when I think about voodoo, I think about a scene in the Anchorman film, because genuinely it's so far away from my understanding that I do not pretend to have a grasp on what voodoo is. It's just maybe one of those things that we consider when somebody upsets us. You know, I'm just going to go and pop off and make a few voodoo dolls. Just a few. voodoo dolls. Not sure what to do with them. I think you stick pins in them. But either way, I'm off to do it. You know, that's kind of my ridiculous stereotypical understanding of voodoo. But of course it isn't in reality. In reality, it's considered a religion. In reality, many people believe it's a power for good. It's just that, like any scenario, you can also potentially use it in a malevolent form. And it's incredibly powerful psychologically. People who believe in voodoo have literally refused hospital medical treatment when they are dying of something that the doctors know they are dying of, because they believe they've been cursed and it's essentially useless to do anything to help because they're going to die anyway. Ultimately, they then do die, and then that gets blamed on the voodoo curse, not the actual medical condition. So it's powerful psychologically, but also it's not always this stereotyped idea that we are told in movies. So a lot of people swear by voodoo and feel it is something very spiritual in a positive way for them. But I don't believe that Sharon's mother is teaching her voodoo in a positive way. I'm feeling that Sharon Carr's mother is more the type of sacrificial animal kind of mother. I think she's one of those who maybe is teaching Carr for a whole heap of wrong reasons. Now, in 1986, Carr's life changes enormously because she's growing up in this place which is poverty-stricken, where she's dealing with this onslaught of violence regularly, and then suddenly the family move to Camberley in Surrey. This would be so blindsiding. You know, when you have a life somewhere and that life reflects your experiences and expectations up until that point because it's what you've adapted to, suddenly being ripped from that environment and placed in somewhere like Surrey is going to be such a culture shock. And it's completely understandable that Carr struggles to settle into her new environment. She finds it very difficult because it's going to feel unbelievably foreign. First of all, it's going to be a hell of a lot of white people around. She's not going to understand the language very effectively. And there is this way that we expect children to just adapt. They're massively adaptable. They're really resilient. I hear that all the time, as if children can just be taken from one space and placed in another space and they'll just thrive. That child is a human being, and human beings struggle when their situations change enormously. We are animals. Whilst we adapt, it takes time. And certainly when you're thinking about having to learn a new language, a new culture, get involved in the school system, and these are all things that are going to add to Sharon Carr's difficulties in her environment. Now, initially when she starts school, she's relatively well behaved, probably because she's pretty terrified and confused. That's probably going on in her head, because like I said, she's been transported to a whole new world, and then it's just like, crack on, get on with it, it's all going to be fine. She's described initially by teachers as being really polite. She was quite sporty, so she played on the basketball team, but it seems to just be the lull before the storm, shall we say, and her behaviour starts to get progressively worse. It deteriorates over time, and then I would imagine the true Carr steps forward. She becomes very violent. She's known as a real bully, a real problem in school, and she hung around with a bad crowd. That's what is noted. I imagine Carr may be the person who created that crowd. That crowd could well have been an okay crowd, just a group of ordinary teens. But then Carr ends up in there, and it just, shall we say, visibly and also experientially just crumbles and becomes a bad crowd. She also starts to smoke cannabis around this time, and this is when she's about 11 years of age that she's using it frequently, and that's really problematic. I know that a lot of people will have their own experiences of cannabis. I know that many of you will swear by it for pain relief. I know that some people will say that it works effectively to treat mental health. I appreciate all of those things, but what we know about young people is when they smoke it early, if there is a predisposition for something like psychosis and schizophrenia, then you have a higher potential of activating these issues and therefore suffering from them in the future. So it could be a contributor to a further fracturing of whatever's going on in Carr's mind. And certainly we can't ignore the fact that she's got quite high-level drug use issues as a very early child, because I also think that that's used as a self-medication. It's anaesthetizing yourself against the world around you. So if you've got some emotional pain, you can use things like alcohol and recreational drugs to dim that pain to some degree. So I do believe at this point we can certainly put Carr in the position of victim and a reactor to trauma, because she's obviously had a relatively traumatic life. But that's where we leave our sympathy and empathy, because people who usually experience and endure trauma, they do the opposite of what we're going to be discussing today. In fact, I would say that people who've experienced and endured trauma will be more likely a risk to themselves because of their self-esteem issues and sometimes their feelings of worthlessness that kind of experience provokes. And they are very sensitive, empathic and loving people. So this story goes down a whole different route, and she doesn't act in the way that I've just talked in life. But nonetheless, she's certainly wounded as a child, and we have to accept that. Now, soon after they've moved to Surrey, Sharon Carr's stepfather actually ends a relationship with her mother. So we've got more dysfunction, we've got more transition, we've got more issues occurring in this young girl's life. But during the conversation where he's saying to Carr's mum, it's over, her mother decides, well, obviously she's a little bit, shall we say, on the unhappy side that he's decided to do this. So she's like, well, what could I do? Could I make him pack his stuff right now, leave through the front door? That would be a good idea. Should I call a friend and ask them for some support because I'm feeling sad? Another good idea. Should I maybe go a little bit far and cut his clothes up? I wouldn't suggest that. But okay, if you're feeling really, really angry and really aggrieved, maybe that's the route to go down. Or should I pour boiling fat all over him? I kid you not. That's what she did. Imagine the pain. And imagine the propensity for violence that somebody has to be able to do that, to actually think about that action. I'm just going to pour boiling fat all over him. He ended up needing hospital attention. Obviously he did. He had burns. And Carr actually witnessed that incident. And I don't know about you, but I'm imagining that if my mother had poured boiling fat over my father, I would have probably been screaming my head off and running down the road saying my mother has lost her mind. That would be kind of the reaction that I would have given. And I imagine quite a lot of people would also act that way. Not Carr. Carr didn't even seem fazed by it. In fact, it didn't connect with her emotionally. Now that suggests on one level she's very used to violence, so she's been a witness for a long time to this. Therefore, she probably isn't that moved because, hey, it's just another day in her home. But we're talking a really high level attack. And it not to kind of nudge her emotionally, that's a red flag. It should have been really traumatic for her. Then Carr doesn't just not emotionally respond to this situation. When she's asked by the police what happened, because clearly it's very unusual for some guy to walk into hospital needing treatment because he's had hot fat poured over him and it not to have been from an abusive scenario. It's quite unusual for an accident like that to occur. So they want to speak to Carr to say, well, you're a witness, what happened? So she just lied. Said that her mum had done absolutely nothing wrong, even though she had been present at that awful assault. And that will be a loyalty connector. I appreciate she wouldn't have wanted her mother to get into trouble. But I also think that's a payback. That's a way of a man who's been a violent alcoholic in her life to be taught a lesson. You know, she's chosen her side and she probably wrongly believes that he deserves some of this treatment. Now, it's around this time as well when she's 11, 12 years of age that she starts harming animals. And that in itself is a major red flag. When we see that in the background of an individual, it's part of the McDonald triad. If we see these kind of things, it's usually a predictor of future violent behaviour. And boy, in this case, we are absolutely hitting the nail on the head when we say that. Now, they believed that one of the reasons that she was going around murdering animals, let's put it into the context it deserves to be put, is because her mother had this belief in voodoo culture. She'd grown up in this voodoo culture and it can actually involve ritualistic killing of animals. It's why me and voodoo would never have got on. It wouldn't have mattered if, you know, the ex-boyfriend could have found himself dealing with some abdominal pains as I was stabbing some doll somewhere by myself. That may have appealed to me when I was a teenager, but I'm afraid the killing of animals would have meant that I was out. Like in The Apprentice. I'm sorry, I'm out. But Carr, let's say, where she is, animal bodies tend to follow. So her next door neighbour's cat was actually found decapitated. And they know that Carr's responsible for this. There's also evidence that she decapitated a dog using a spade. Just think about the amount of physicality involved in that. To get somebody's dog, to get a spade, to hold it down probably with your foot, and to then actually decapitate the dog using that spade. The terror in that poor animal's eyes, it goes against every instinct that most humans have, doesn't it? Because all you want to do with vulnerable animals is protect them, but not her. She wants to destroy them. She gets a joy from that experience. She craves it, clearly, because she repeats the action again and again. And all I'm saying is it's a good job that Carr didn't live next door to me, because if one of my animals had ended up in such a situation, well, she'd have to hope that she'd not left that spade somewhere available to myself, shall we say. Now, a friend also went down the line, because when this case gets the notoriety that it gets, people start to talk about what she was like as a kid. And one of her friends said that she would literally get hamsters and fry them alive. If you have a friend like that, I'm just going to suggest, tell an adult. Just tell an adult. Not Carr's mother, that probably wouldn't give us the response and reaction we require. But just go out and tell an adult, excuse me, yeah? Do you know Sharon Carr? Yeah, I've heard some rumours about Sharon Carr involving a dog. Yeah, she's just in the kitchen right now. Is she cooking? Yeah, she's cooking in the kitchen right now. Not with boiling fat. Her mother usually takes precedence over that type of cooking. No, she's just frying. Okay, why are you telling me this? Because she's frying live hamsters. Just going to go and get my spade a minute. Just hang on. Anyway, this is what she's doing. And this can be seen without a doubt as a precursor to Sharon's later murder that we're going to talk about today. There's something about her liking the control. There's something about her enjoying inflicting pain. And let's remember that, because those things that I've just talked about, the decapitation of the cat, the decapitation of the dog, the frying the live animals, it's about pain. So it's not just about the actual killing, the ending of a life, because that can be immediate. You can do that very quickly. Hold a gun to somebody's head and shoot it. That person isn't going to suffer. They're not even going to know what's happened because it's so quick. With Carr, we're talking about a girl who is absolutely fascinated with inflicting pain and sustaining that pain for a period of time. Just imagine being fried, because that's what she does to those animals. Their nervous system will be enduring the agony that she's inflicting on them, and she is getting joy from it. Katie Rackliff, let's take a second to look at the victim in this case. So she was lovely. Ultimately, that's probably the easiest descriptor of her. So she was a really popular girl. She was very bubbly. Her mum said that one of the things about Katie was that she was a really trusting and happy girl. So automatically we're drawn into a position where we can imagine that her life leading up to the point where she's murdered had been a good one. That she looks at the world around her and doesn't feel that she has to be worried about it, doesn't feel that she has to question people, because her world has been a safe world. And that ultimately is what makes this so upsetting, because she is going through the motions of her life believing that, firstly, it's going to be one that's full of joy, because it has been. Secondly, that's going to be full of success, because she's en route to it. And most importantly, where she isn't walking around feeling hyper vulnerable, because her environment has brought her up in a way where the people around her have made her feel very safe. So at 18 years of age, we have this lovely young woman. She's really hardworking. She's a trainee hairdresser, and she has big ambitions. She's training in hairdressing because in the end, she wants to own her own hair salon. She's the type of girl we all want to be friends with. She's the type of girl who has aspirations that are big in this world, and she wants to succeed. And she has all of the foundations, the variables, the skills, and of course, the ambition to make that come true. On June the 6th, 1992, it's just an ordinary day. And Katie decides that she wants to go to a club. The club's called Ragamuffins. It's in Camberley. She wants to go with a best friend. Clearly, just having fun, as you do with your friend. Going out partying, just living life to the fullest. She'd recently broken up with her boyfriend, so clearly she's looking at filling that gap potentially, or just letting her hair down and having a single life. And she really feels that getting out to Ragamuffins and dancing the night away is going to take her mind off this breakup. Once the club shuts, because they stay till the end, she starts to walk home by herself. And the reason for that is she couldn't find her friend. Now that says two things. Firstly, these sliding doors moments that occur. If she'd managed to find a friend, I doubt we'd be covering this murder today. If she decided to get a cab, we certainly wouldn't be covering this case today. But this sliding doors moment happens, and essentially because the world feels safe to her, she hasn't had reason to question everything and everyone. She decides to walk home by herself. And it's on this journey that she comes across Carr. Now, bear in mind, at this point, Carr is a 100% stranger to Katie. Now, the details as to what actually played out during this encounter, they aren't absolutely clear. But Katie Rackliff would never arrive home. The next morning, Katie's body is discovered in Farnborough. It's discovered by a group of young boys who are obviously traumatized by this situation. They find her body in an alley just located near a cemetery. First of all, she's partially undressed, so this immediately draws our attention to a potential sexual attack. She'd been forcefully and brutally butchered. It's as simple as that. She was stabbed around 30 times. Just imagine the repetition, the physicality, the determination, the frenzy of that kind of killer. And the knife that she'd been killed with was around 6 inches long. She had stab wounds as well, not just to her body, but to her sexual regions, so to her vagina, to her anus, to her breasts. And the attack, to put this in context, was so savage, so brutal, that some of the knife thrusts had actually gone all the way through her body and hit the floor underneath her. Now, that brings into sharp focus the level of aggression, the level of rage, but also the ambition within the killer, because this is overkill at the biggest level. That person could have killed her far more quickly. And even when she was dead, it seems that they would have carried on stabbing her again and again and again. And that wasn't enough. That didn't fulfill them enough, because her body had also been mutilated after she had died. When they described it in the press, they described it as a Jack the Ripper style incident, and 100% it's evidenced, isn't it, by those injuries that I've just described. Now, as the police start to dissect the incident and figure forward what they think's played out, initially they believe they've got to be looking for a young man. They believe that this guy would be in his 30s, he'd be well built, because the attack was just carried out with such brutal force. And also, one of the things that they felt that person would have to be able to do physically would be to drag Katie. So they believe that she'd been dragged to where she was, so they would need to be strong. They also believed that there was a sexual element, of course, because of the fact that she's found partially clothed, and there's just such an attack on her genital areas that demonstrates something sexual in nature. Now, the one thing that the police could never have imagined, and I mean, if you had asked every single police officer what their thoughts were about this killer, in fact, if you'd asked anybody in the local area, let alone those trained in this area, they would be talking about an individual that matches the profile that I've just described. You know, an older guy who's definitely very, very strong and who has a brutality within his nature that arguably could even bring up past offences, for example, because you would expect that this wouldn't be somebody's first attack, because arguably it seems to be so rageful that you would imagine this person is potentially living in fantasy for a period of time and then releasing that fantasy in the killing. Sounds like a serial killer murder when we describe what I've just described. So if you ask these dyed-in-the-wool, experienced investigators who the killer would be, they would never, ever in a million years have anticipated that the perpetrator we were dealing with would be a 12-year-old girl. Just let that sink in. A 12-year-old girl. Contextualize the actual murder. Just take a minute to go over in your head what I told you about how she was stabbed. This is a 12-year-old kid who's carried out this murder, and yet they have gone for the genital regions, the breast area, the anus, etc. That is so shocking. because it feels very sexually motivated. And we're not expecting to see that when it comes down to a perpetrator of this age. Also, the location of her body was really puzzling because Farnborough was a 15-minute drive away from Ragamuffins in Camberley, and that also wasn't on Katie's route home. So it's assumed at this moment in time that a car must have been involved to transport Katie. And at that time, Dr. David Holmes, who was a criminal psychologist, said, for the investigating police, Katie's death was one of mystery. There were no leads, no CCTV, no DNA evidence. And her brutal murder, because of that, would actually remain an unsolved mystery for 2 years. And we have to remember, Katie's family, during that 2 years, would have no sense of closure. And you can never have closure over the death of a loved one, but closure as far as who was responsible for stealing a person of incalculable worth in their life. So they are in purgatory, having to manage all those emotions because they're not getting the answers they deserve. We get to June the 7th, 1994, and a transition occurs that is going to ultimately mean that this case unfolds and the investigators are finally introduced into the information that they need to solve this murder. Now, bear in mind, at this point, we have Sharon Carr, who's 14 years of age. What does she do? She goes into school and she stabs another student. It's a girl called Anne-Marie Clifford. They're both attending Collingwood College Comprehensive School. That 13-year-old girl just goes into school, it's an ordinary day, expecting a normal experience of, I don't know, being really bored in class and hoping to God there's something nice on the dinner menu. But it's not going to work out that way for Anne-Marie Clifford that day, because she's going to run and have her sliding doors moment with Sharon Carr. So Carr asks the unsuspecting 13-year-old to help her look for a £1 coin. She tells her that she's dropped it in the school toilets. Bear in mind, Carr is scary, she's a bully, she's a propensity for violence, she's in with the bad kids, and she's asking this younger kid, come and help me. What is the young kid going to do? She's going to be like, sure, Sharon, not a problem. Why? Because she's going to be scared of her, or she's going to want to ingratiate herself to somebody who's quite powerful. Makes perfect sense. What you're not going to get is a kid going, no, Sharon, it's not happening, because the consequences of that could be problematic for her. So of course she goes. Now, once that girl gets in the bathroom, Sharon stabs her in the back. She's got a 4-inch long knife. And it was an injury that was so severe, it punctured one of her lungs. Now, fortunately, and in divine providence occurs, a group of 5 girls enter the bathroom just after she's been attacked. And so immediately, and thank God, they intervene, they call for help. And this almost certainly prevented Anne-Marie's death, because we already know what Carr's capable of. She really doesn't care about boundaries. She made a decision that she was going to stab somebody, and the likelihood is that she wanted to stab somebody and kill somebody as she had before. And bear in mind, this was another unprovoked attack just 2 years after she'd murdered Katie. Now, thankfully, Anne-Marie survived despite these almost fatal injuries, but she suffered from PTSD afterwards. She's found the whole thing extremely traumatic, because if you cannot even go to school safely, if your life is put at risk in an environment that we arguably, on the whole, believe is a safe one to be in, then what can you trust? Where can you go? And in an interview, Anne-Marie said that Sharon was standing over her with the knife, smiling. She was enjoying it. Can you imagine just the chaos and confusion as you realise you've been stabbed? And then you look at the perpetrator, who's a kid, so left field. And that person just looks like they're finding immense pleasure in your pain. I mean, the chaos that would unfold in your thought process, because you just know, unless something happens right now, I ain't going to be walking away from this. And like I said, if those girls had not walked into that toilet, I don't think she would have been walking anywhere, because I believe absolutely fully that Carr would have murdered her. Now, at this point, Carr is obviously arrested and she's sentenced to 2 counts of actual bodily harm. She's also given 2 years at a Young Offenders Institute. And it's here, when she's imprisoned at that Young Offenders Institute, that she starts to talk, because Carr likes to impress people. Carr wants to be the person in charge in that environment. She wants to be the bully. She wants to be the powerful. She wants to make the other young offenders afraid of her. She wants to bolster her reputation, bolster her image. And it's at this point she admits that she killed Katie Rackliff. But she didn't do it because she wanted to, feel the prick of conscience and give the family closure. She didn't want to actually be responsible and take accountability. It's nothing to do with that. It was just so she could brag. And that's what she does. She's bragging rather than confessing, rather than expressing any guilt. So this gets out, and then the police are called and they need to interview her about this. Because, hey, even though Carr is a violent, malevolent individual, we can see that by the actions of her stabbing the girl who survived. The truth is she could also be a major liar. She could just be staking claim to this unsolved murder because it's convenient. No one's been caught, therefore she can suggest that it's her even though she's lying. The police come and they ask her to describe what happened, and she gives them details about the murder that hadn't even been released to the public. So she tells them things like Katie's bracelet had been stolen. So only the perpetrator, or somebody involved in the killing at least, would know if that had occurred. It's one of those details that you'd have to be present at the killing, or at least be aware of who killed that individual and told you that they'd taken the bracelet, but you have to have a connection to know that detail. They immediately get a warrant for Carr's house and they search it, and then, wow. What is it about these kind of killers that means that they write diaries? I often ask myself that question. It's probably because they can't really talk to another average human about their thoughts because they know what they think and what they want to do is wrong. So to have that conversation with another person would cause them problems, at least mean that that individual would probably think, I don't know, I don't want to be around you anymore, you absolute freak. But you can't necessarily engage in relationships of truth with people if you know that there is a darkness in your mind that Carr has. This diary, like with so many of these killers, is peppered with information that's incredibly incriminating, and it depicts, in my opinion, just how disturbed Carr's mind was. So first of all, she had literally used her journey to graphically document the murder, and the glee that she felt while she was committing it. Bear in mind who Katie was. Katie was this effervescent, lovely, loving, sweet, kind, pro-social girl. And Carr has just absolutely thrilled herself with the murder and the recounting of the murder of this gorgeous girl. And she did that, one, because she didn't want to forget a detail. She wants to hold that memory purely in her mind. So she doesn't want to chance forgetting. And also she can relive it again and again. And she does that in her diary as well. She reflects on it. She revels in it numerous times. One of the entries actually read, I enjoyed putting the blade up her. It made me feel powerful. I had to overcome her serenity, her security. So she absolutely knows why she did that, why she injured her in that way. It was to make her feel that sense of power. And she sees her as something pure. She sees Katie as something good. And destroying her in that way, violating her in that way, that brings her down to a different level as far as Carr is concerned. She then wrote that she felt that she was born to be a murderer. That's probably one of the appropriate and accurate points that Carr makes. Yes, I think none of us will doubt for a second that Carr has got that absolutely correct. She is clearly somebody born to be a murderer, which means that she's clearly somebody who should never be walking our streets again. And she adds to this, killing is a mass turn on. And it just makes me so high. I never want to come down. That really reminds me of somebody like Joanna Dennehy, the serial killer in the UK, who killed 3 guys in Peterborough and tried killing another 2. It's the same thrill kill mentality. So rare in women. So absolutely rare that I've only really covered 2 cases that involve a thrill killer. She also demonstrated that she had no remorse for doing it. She said, I wish I could kill you again. I promised I'd make you suffer more. Your terrified screams turned me on. And isn't it disconcerting and also intriguing that she uses the first person? That's how she describes it, the I wish I could kill you again. Like she has some kind of relationship with Katie still. That there is a intimacy as far as she's concerned because she murdered her. The fact that she is directing this language that she writes to the victim. That again suggests, like I said, there is a thread that Carr believes she still has connected with Katie because ultimately she took her life. And it's really devastating to know that Katie's family will be aware that the regret that Carr has is that even though she made her suffer so grotesquely, she wished that she could have made her suffer more. When you think about the brutality of the murder, it's grotesque in nature, and Katie would have died in pain and fear and terror. But for Carr, it wasn't satisfying enough because it didn't last long enough. For her, killing is an adrenaline rush, but it's also sexually exciting too. It's very lust killer orientated. And again, why is that so unusual? Because Carr is female, and lust killers don't tend to be female. She also wrote, "Last night, it occurred to me that killing her did me good. Now I know what I'm capable of, and I will do it again." And my God, we know she absolutely followed through with that, didn't she? She attempted to kill again. Then there was another chilling diary entry, and it read, "Every night, I see the devil in my dreams, sometimes even in my mirror, but I realize it was just me." Again, I'm not going to dispute that point. I think, quite possibly, when she was looking in the mirror and seeing herself, she was indeed seeing the devil. Because these kind of actions that she's taking part in, these kind of actions that are literally executing or trying to execute innocent individuals that she has no relationship with, it is as evil as it can be. It makes the world feel as unsafe as it could ever feel. And if ever there's a descriptor of the devil, it would be in those themes, that they would want human beings to be terrified to just live their lives, always ultimately believing that somebody may steal that life from them without any control, without any knowledge that this was going to happen. You could just be walking down the street, you wouldn't be able to protect yourself because people like Carr exist within the world around us. So I think when she looks in the mirror and sees the devil, it's because she recognizes the devil is certainly within her. When the police interview her and try to get the fine details of exactly what occurred, she gives different ones. So she gives 3 different accounts, but the only consistent piece of information throughout these versions of these events is that she did kill Katie by repeatedly stabbing her. In 2 of the accounts, she actually talks about the fact that there were 2 men with her in the car the night of the murder, and she said that they had both had sexual activity with Katie before she murdered her, and that they also helped to dump Katie's body. Now, the 2 men who Sharon did name as being in the car with her, the thing about those individuals is they provided alibis for each other. So essentially it discounted them. But I struggle with this. But it's like, you've been implicated in a murder with your friend Stan. Have I? Yeah, it was last Wednesday. And apparently you and Stan, with a girl called Sharon Carr, and you helped to dispose of a body and also sexually violated that body. Right, couldn't possibly be me. How come? Well, because the night you're talking about, when I was with Stan, yeah, he was with me and we weren't there. Oh, so you and Stan were doing something elsewhere? Yeah, me and Stan were doing something elsewhere, so we weren't doing that. Can anybody else give you an alibi for that and corroborate that you were elsewhere and not involved in this killing? No, just Stan, just me and Stan. Me and Stan can corroborate each other's alibis, so therefore we definitely didn't do it. I mean, is that actually an alibi? Genuinely, honestly, is it an alibi when 2 potential perpetrators say, well, we didn't do it and we're backing one another up, so there you go. But if that's the case and they weren't involved, well, there's still a really sinister question to ask, isn't there? Because how did Sharon Carr move Katie herself? Someone else must have helped drag her body. And that would have indicated that there were other people involved who've literally walked away, who've gone unpunished. The same with the fact that Katie was found in an area that she wouldn't have been. That does suggest that there was a car involved ultimately. But as noted, these 2 individuals that she named, they had alibis because they gave one another them, and so it clearly wasn't them. I can only speculate, but I do think that with the evidence I've just talked about, it's clear that she probably didn't act alone that night. I'm sure she was the one who carried out the horrific murder we're discussing, and she absolutely deserves what's coming to her. But the very fact that she stuck claim to this and she's quite proud of her actions, I don't think she'd implicate others to just get away with a lesser sentence, because no one's going to give her one. But arguably, chances are, therefore, we've got people who may have been involved in this murder free, walking the streets, which is very disconcerting. 4 years after Katie's murder, Carr recounted the death of Katie in her current diary. Yeah, 4 years. So bear in mind, this is when she is incarcerated. So she's writing it and rewriting it and remembering it and reflecting on it and getting off on it. That's what's happening. This will sexually motivate her. This will help her feel that connection, this thread that she has towards her victim. She said, I bring the knife to her chest. Her eyes are closing. She's pleading with me. So I bring the knife to her again and again. Ugh, that sends shivers up my spine. It really does, because when you think about cold-blooded killers, they're rare. Even in the cases that I cover, sometimes you will see things get out of hand. Sometimes you will see where passion turns into murder. And sometimes you will see cold, brutal murder in the context of an individual who just wants to kill, was born to kill, will always kill. And whilst they're rare, Carr absolutely fits that profile. You have this victim, Katie, pleading with the police, stop. Of course she was. She would have been terrified for her life. She would have done whatever it took to try to get the humanity to bleed back into the perpetrator, to just reactivate the reality of, what are you doing? Let me go. And for Carr, it's something that made her hurt her even more. She enjoys that power and domination. She enjoys the fear. It's what Richard Ramirez said, wasn't it? He used to like looking in the eyes of those that he murdered and seeing their terror. And that's exactly what she feels too. We get to May 1996, and at this point, Carr's charged with the murder of Katie Rackliff. She was interviewed to get this information for 27 hours. So there was a lot of conversation occurring during that period of time. Detective Sergeant Paul Clement said in a statement that Sharon was frigid when she spoke. So she was really disassociated to some degree. She wasn't emotionally engaged and invested at all. He said the majority of the persons you interview express some emotion over their actions. With her, however, emotion and logic were totally absent. Now, it won't surprise you that in spite of the fact that Carr had given, shall we say, some pretty intricate and intimate details about the murder, such as what happened to Katie's bracelet, and also, I don't know, has documented it in all of her diaries. That in itself is, I don't know, I'm going to throw it out there, a little bit on the incriminating side. You know, I keep journals, not as much now as I used to, but back in the day, you can find out what I was doing at 14 years of age, dating a young man up my road, because it's all in there. You can just go back and retrace my entire embarrassing, terrible hair childhood, right? So I'm not making up things in those diaries because it's about me speaking to me. So there's no way that Carr has written diaries based on fantasy. She's done it based on the actual physical murder of Katie. And she does that to revisit it again and again. And the fact that she has told the police this, they've searched her room and they've got evidence of this, would be enough to condemn her in court. Of course it would. But for some reason, in spite of this, and in spite of saying to the police, yes, I did do it, she decides that she's going to retract her admission of guilt 2 months after confessing. It's probably got a bit real for her. You know, the bragging, I'm so big, I'm so cool, I'm so scary, I'm so all these things criminal, that everybody's got to look at me and think that I'm someone super special in her wing at the young offenders. It's probably starting to crumble in her mind a little bit, where she thinks, it's probably likely I'm not going to get out of prison. Maybe I should just say, I don't know what you're all on about. I'm totally not guilty. We get to March 1997, and unsurprisingly, Carr's convicted of murder. The jury unanimously, yes, that's right, every single one of us agreed, settled on the guilty verdict after 5 hours. They said it was murder as opposed to manslaughter. I mean, why manslaughter was even in the mix is a little bit strange, because you don't find a body so brutalized, so violated when it's manslaughter. Manslaughter is one of those things that can happen by mistake, for example, and we're not talking about a crime that played out where anybody died, was killed by mistake. So this made Carr the youngest murderer in the UK. Bear in mind, she was 12 years of age when she did it. 12 years of age when she committed that brutal attack. Mr. Justice Scott Baker said, "What is clear is that you had a sexual motive for this killing, and it is apparent from both the brutal manner in which you mutilated her body and the chilling entries in your diary recordings you had done that killing, as you put it, turns you on." The judge said, "You are an extremely dangerous young woman." I don't think there's enough words to describe the depths of depravity that she was capable of and she is capable of. But I think the judge sums it up very, very effectively. Carr at this point is sentenced to life in prison with a 14-year minimum term. But the way that it placed this term was that she'd only be able to be released when she's no longer considered a threat to the public. So that will be in 3963, the year 3963. Yes, that's when essentially any of us would even consider that she would no longer be a threat to the public. So because she has this kind of sentence, it's unlikely that she's ever going to get out. When she was sentenced, Carr apparently smiled. Now again, what does that tell you about her? There's almost a centre of attention and enjoying the scenario play out. Because the thing about somebody like Carr is she can dominate people wherever she goes. So maybe freedom isn't that important to her even. Maybe just being the person who can be as intimidating, as bullying, as violent to some degree as possible is something that she can gain in environments that she's sent to. Because that will be her main MO. Her main MO will be to dominate people. And sometimes when people are incarcerated at certain places, they get to do that very effectively. Now, Katie Rackliff's family, they say she should never be released. And every single one of you listening to this, I know you'll feel exactly the same. Her mother described that she felt like her and her family were the ones actually serving the sentence. She said, not a day goes by when you don't think about it. It's not natural for your children to die before you. It's hard to come to terms with it. You just think, why her? And that is exactly how you would feel when your little girl, because I know she was a teenager, I know she was of an age where she's considered a young adult, but to her mother, that's her baby. And her baby should have been able to go out dancing with her best mate and come home safe. To have lost her child in that way, in that extraordinarily brutal way, is something that will haunt every single moment that her mum lives. During Carr's time in prison, what can we say about that? Well, you know those, shall we say, slightly left field ideas that I have for potential punishments in the future? I think that this is one that will be an appropriate usage for such new introducing of such punishments. The one where we tow them to a small island, a desolate island in the middle of nowhere, where we just leave them with their equally malevolent, sinister counterparts for eternity. And then we just let them peer manage that situation for the next however many years they survive. There won't be a lot of food available. There will be some, but I guess that they'll be able to think about inventive ideas of how they can eat and what they can eat whilst sharing that place together. Not saying it's ever going to get passed through government, that we should be allowed to tow people like Carr to these islands. But I'm just saying, if we were able to do that, well, she would certainly be somebody I would put forward for this opportunity. Because during her time in prison, just digressed a little bit there, didn't I? Sharon Carr has attacked numerous people. So she's attacked staff because she has no consideration, care or consequence where boundaries are concerned. She's also attacked other inmates. She tried to strangle 2 nurses at an assessment centre. 2 nurses, literally people there who are actually helping, but not for Carr. Carr's just like, I'm just going to strangle somebody today. May as well go for the healthcare professional. And she also admitted that she wanted to cut the throat of another prisoner. I imagine the psychiatrist or staff or whoever was having to listen to that was secretly backing away during her conversation and hoping that Carr hadn't been anywhere near anything sharp, because this woman lives in fantasy. This woman enjoys killing. And you don't change that by locking them up. That still exists within their mind. And to anybody that she's around, she poses a threat. Then on the 16th of June 1998, it won't surprise you to know that they ended up transferring her to Broadmoor Hospital. It's a high security psychiatric hospital. It's where the Moors murderer Ian Brady ended up, because at the end of the day, it houses some of the most terrifying killers the world has ever known. And the reason that she was moved there was she got sectioned under the Mental Health Act 1983. And at the point that they assess her fully, it turns out she has schizoaffective disorder. And it is a very challenging mental illness. We're talking about a cross with schizophrenia, bipolar, and a whole host of other issues that play into that diagnosis. So very difficult for anyone who suffers from it. But 99.999% of people with schizoaffective disorder, they would never harm anyone. Not in any universe. So what we're saying is that Carr, who is a killer, also has schizoaffective disorder. It's not that she has that and that's what made her a killer. It's quite the contrary. It's the opposite. It's just that she's a killer who also has this mental illness. Now, Professor Francesca Hope, who's a neuroscientist, they describe this particular condition as a combination of schizophrenia, which is a psychosis, and a mood disorder, along with hallucinations, paranoia, and delusions. And she said that Sharon would have experienced either depression, mania, or indeed both. Now, at Broadmoor, Sharon Carr is classed as a restricted prisoner. She did attempt to get this downgraded because she wanted to be moved to an open prison. I can imagine how that went. I just want to get it downgraded, this restrictive prisoner lark. I want to get it downgraded. Okay, why do you want to get it downgraded? I have decided that it will be far better for me if I am moved to an open prison. To an open prison. To an open prison. The ones that are open. To an open prison. Yeah, the ones that are open, that mean that I can kind of, I don't know, go and work at a charity shop in the day, have a bit of a wander, go for a coffee in town. The thing is, Sharon, how do I put this? You are somebody who literally attacked 2 nurses in an assessment centre and also told staff that you wanted to slit the throat of another prisoner. Yeah, I know, but I just think that it would be good if I had a more open opportunity to doing such things. And I feel that an open prison will give me such an opportunity. How do I go about downgrading my sentence? Well, interestingly, there's a volunteer program, and this will hopefully give you more of that open prison scenario. Emma Kenny has actually come up with this idea where all you need to do is volunteer to take a boat that's taking you to a special island, and I'm sure you'll work it out from there, Sharon. Okay? Genuinely, she wanted to be moved to an open prison. Of course, she's considered at that point far too unstable for that. And all of her applications for parole have also been rejected because she literally still demonstrates exactly the same risk factors that she did at the time of the murder. Criminal psychologist Gordon Tressler, he said the fact that she kills without motive means that she is and will continue to be a very unpredictable and dangerous person. And it is difficult to imagine that it would ever be safe for Carr to be released. I do appreciate that we in the UK believe in second chances, we believe in rehabilitation, we believe that people can make good on their pasts and live pro-social lives, even when they've done some pretty violent, grotesque things. However, when you're dealing with someone like Carr, even if she managed to, I don't know, have some massive epiphany, find God, change her life completely, become the best prisoner that Broadmoor have ever seen, the best patient that they've ever dealt with, would it ever be worth risking the possibility that another Katie experience could play out? Because people like Carr, they are so unpredictable. They are so deeply violent. They are without doubt malevolent. That even if work could be done to reduce the tenacity and capacity for these kind of actions, would they ever be able to be reduced to a point where we could genuinely say she wouldn't kill again? And I think the answer to that is no. Better that Carr remains incarcerated for the rest of her natural life than risk the potential of another Katie or Anne-Marie situation ever having the opportunity to play out again. And also, for Katie's family, why should they ever have to suffer more? Because they would. If they knew that she was walking the streets again, it would be an injustice for their much-loved Katie. So I would say, let's hope that Sharon Carr never gets to breathe a breath of fresh air in freedom, because she simply doesn't deserve it. Let me know your thoughts on this case. I hope I've told you a little bit more about it than you may have known before. If it's new to you, shocking, right? 12 years of age and a cold-blooded, brutal killer. Absolutely mind-blowing, isn't it? Thanks for joining me, guys. I appreciate every single one of you. I hope you've enjoyed this extra content. And as ever, our thoughts go out to Katie's family. It is incalculably horrifying to know that they've had to endure the type of loss that I've covered today. Be safe, everybody. See you next time.